All right, page 10, Aftermath of the Grand Army of Labor. So by August 5th, 1877, a little more than 2 weeks after it began, the Great Strike had collapsed. Scattered activity continued through August. Black female laundry workers struck in Texas, and miners struck throughout Pennsylvania, but working people were not prepared to fight a long battle against the army. Soon, owners everywhere regained control of their railroads. What did the strike achieve? In the short term, some workers won minor gains, such as, and remember this for your video quiz, such as the repeal of wage cuts and oppressive work rules. There were even a few pay raises. The Michigan Central Railroad increased wages by 12%. Though some workers lost their jobs, there were surprisingly few firings or criminal prosecutions. Still, most of the wage cuts and layoffs that provoked the strike remained in effect. You can see some of the damage brought by the strike on the bottom of page 10 here. Most importantly, the Great Strike had a profound impact on American attitudes about industrial society. After 1877, workers and big businessmen increasingly divided into separate camps. Some newspaper editors lumped workers, immigrants, and communists together as enemies of progress. The beginning of red baiting workers, accusing them of being communists to discredit them in the public eye. There were calls to reorganize militias, to build armories in cities to house troops and their munitions, and to strengthen the standing army. So, in other words, instead of trying to alleviate the conditions that caused the strike in the first place, they just throw more police and more authority more guns at the issue. Meanwhile, working Americans searched for new forms of national organization to counter the growing economic and political power of industrial corporations. In the years following the Great Strike, workers set up several national unions, and remember these, each with its own approach. The largest of the first and largest was the Knights of Labor. Okay, remember the Knights of Labor. Founded in secret in 1869 and organizing openly after 1879, the Knights grew rapidly, reaching a membership of over 700,000 by 1886. The Knights built local labor assemblies which included all workers, regardless of occupation, skill, sex, or race, although they still excluded Chinese workers. While using strikes and boycotts on issues of pay and working conditions, the Knights also proposed a larger change, a new type of industrial society. They set up worker-owned businesses and called for a cooperative commonwealth where everyone could work for and own a share of a small productive enterprise. So don't forget the Knights of Labor. It eventually fails because, as you will see, the AFL eventually emerges and they only accept skilled white male workers. And to be sure, the Knights of Labor was an almost all-inclusive union, but the workers with the most bargaining power were the skilled workers. The less skilled you are, the more replaceable you are. So the worse bargaining position you have. So once the AFL began siphoning off, and the AFL still exists, by the way. It's now the AFL-CIO, led by Richard Trumka. All right. So anyway, once the AFL began siphoning the skilled workers out of the Knights of Labor, the Knights of Labor eventually collapses. All right. But they're significant because they were the first national union. They were huge. They were almost all-inclusive. And as you saw in the second half of that paragraph, their demands or their desires were pretty radical. They really did want to restructure American economic society to be much more worker friendly, for workers to have much more say and even be part owners. They were cooperative. They wanted to support co-ops. You know, today we'd call it an employee-owned business. Okay, but back then we'd call it a cooperative or a co-op. Okay, so their worker demands were not just what we'd call bread and butter issues of better pay, better working conditions. They wanted just a different economic society in which to exist. All right, one that was more run by workers cooperatively. All right, as they wanted to be part owners. Meanwhile, next paragraph, some skilled workers and eventually more skilled workers organized national unions representing specific crafts. their specific trade. In 1886, they founded the American Federation of Labor, the AFL, and they put cigar maker Sam Gompers at its helm. AFL unions tended to concentrate on short-term goals, so those bread and butter issues of winning more pay for their members. So the final decades of the 19th century saw countless battles between capital and labor, owners and workers, and really they went on for decades and decades and decades. All right, it was not really until the New Deal where FDR legitimized unions. Unions were never really banned, but owners were able to, they were legally allowed to ignore the unions. If workers threatened to unionize, they would just fire the workers, replace the workers, hire what workers would call scab workers, replacement workers. It wasn't until the New Deal where FDR legitimized unions, meaning that the Wagner Act made it so that if a workplace unionizes, they choose a union democratically, and that union registers with uh, the national government. The owners cannot ignore the union. They have to negotiate the terms of employment with the union. Okay. Um, but up until that point, and even since then, it hasn't been nearly as frequent. But up until the 1930s, mid to late 1930s, strike upon strike upon strike. In fact, it was heavy strike activity in the early to mid 30s that kind of pushed FDR into a stronger second New Deal. And by stronger, I mean geared more towards workers and Main Street, not so much Wall Street. So, second sentence, at stake was the shape of the emerging industrial society. That's what they were fighting over, labor and capital, workers and owners, owners and workers, I should say. Who would control the new industries? Who would pay the cost of industrialization, and who would reap its benefits? Would the government pay a lot of the cost? Um, would workers and owners share equally, like players and owners do in the NFL, almost equally? Um, these questions were at the heart of many of these conflicts. What would equality and independence mean in the new industrial America? Through the Knights, the AFL, and other organizations, working Americans asserted their right to a voice in one of the most important national debates of the era. And that's what a union does for the workers. It provides them with a collective voice so they can presumably have a voice equal to that of the owner.